Hey y'all, it's Miss Flores. So today we are going to continue working with multiplying with decimals, but now instead of using hundreds grids, we are going to use area models. So area models are basically kind of using the idea of finding area, so length times width, and we're going to use that to help us multiply decimals together. So let's look at our first example. So our first one is 27 times 8 3/10. So let's solve this our normal way, how we would do before, right? Just do 27 times 8.3. So that would be 27 times 8.3. So I'm going to multiply my 3 out first. We do 3 times 7, which is 21. Carry the 2. 3 times 2 is 6, plus 2 is 8. Now, I'm going to multiply out my 8. In order to do that, I got to add my placeholder 0, my placeholder smiley, and now I'm ready to multiply that 8 out. So I'll do 8 times 7, which is 56, carry the 5, and then do 8 times 2, which is 16 plus 5 is 21. And now I'm going to add them together. 1 plus 0 is 1, 8 plus 6 is 14, carry the 1, 2, and then 2. But I had one number, right? This 3 was to the right of my decimal, so I need to scoot my decimal over 1 and end up with 22.4, right? So the answer should be 22.4. But let's break that down a little differently. So now let's use our area model. So in our area model, we basically kind of use the idea of expanded form, and we multiply our numbers individually. So like how when we multiply traditionally, I did 3 times 7, then 3 times 2. Well, it's really 3 times 7 and then 3 times 20, right? Because that's using the tens place. So that's what we do with area models. So I'm going to separate my numbers. So up here, I'll do 27. My 27 will be here. So that's going to be 20 and then 7. I'm breaking up their place values. And on the other side, I'll do 8 3/10. So I have 8 and then 3/10. So that's 0.3. So now, wherever my boxes line up or overlap, that is the problem that I'll have. So in this box, that's with 20 and 8, right? So my problem is going to be 20. It's going to be 20 times 8. 20 times 8 would be there. In my next box, I have 7. All right, I've got 7 and 8. So that's going to be 7 times 8. In my next box, I've got 3 and 20. So that's going to be 20 times 3/10. And then in my final box, I've got my 3/10 times 7. So I've got 7 times 3/10. So those are all the problems I'm going to do. We can use mental math to solve for these answers. So we said that was going to be 20 times 8, right? Well, we can do mental math to solve that, right? I can do 2 times 8, which is 16. Plus this 0 we didn't use is 160. 7 times 8, that's a math fact number, right? 7 times 8 is 56. Now, I can still use mental math to solve decimal problems. If I've got 20 times 3/10, just like before, I look for my numbers that aren't zeros. I've got 2 and 3, which is 6. But I've got this 0 that I didn't use, so I add it to the end. But then I have one number that was to the right of my decimal, so it scoots over 1. So I end up with 6.0. Let me write that a little bigger. 6.0. Because our decimal scooted over 1. So I have 6 for 20 times 3/10. And same thing for 7 times 3/10. I'm going to look at my numbers that aren't zeros. I've got 7 and 3, which is 21. But I had one number to the right of my 0, so I scooted over 1. Ended with 2.1. So now, these are all of the pieces that I'm going to add up to get my answer. When we multiplied, we got 224.1. So now, if I add them all up, that should get me that answer as well. So let's do 160 plus 56 plus 6.0. So remember, I've got decimals, right? So if it's outside, it's to the right. So I got to put decimals to the right of all my whole numbers. So plus 6.0 plus 2.1. Add placeholder zeros to my areas that don't have zeros. 0 plus 0 plus 0 plus 1 is 1. 0 plus 6 is 6. Plus another 6 is 12. Plus 2 is 14. Carry the 1. 1 plus 6 is 7. Plus 5 is 12. Carry the 1. 1 plus 1 is 2. My decimals were all in a line, so my answer decimal goes right here. And my answer ends up being 224.1, just like it was when we multiplied. So this isn't necessarily supposed to be a faster way of multiplication. This is just to show you how, when we're doing our standard algorithm of multiplication, how we're multiplying all of our place values together, right? So in here, I just basically, multiplied how we did, if I did my traditional 27 times 8.3, right? How if I did 7 times 3 right there? Well, that was here, 7 times 3/10. When I did the 2 times 3, that was 3/10 times 20, which is right here, right? Then when I did my 8 times 7, that was right here. And then when I did my 8 times 2, I did 8 times 20, which was here. So we did all of those pieces in that problem. We just broke them all up. And that is multiplication using area models. Let's look at another example. Now let's say I've got 19 times 7/500. So remember, we are using place values and we're breaking up our numbers based on those place values. So 19 would be 10 plus 9, right? 7/500 would be 7/10 plus 500. So those numbers are what I'm going to put in my box. So I've got 10 and 9, and then 7/10 and 500. So our first thing we're going to do. So remember this box. This first box lined up with 7/10 and 10. So my problem is going to be 10 times 7/10. My box down here is going to be 7/10 times 9. So I'm going to do 9 times 7/10 in this box. In my top box, I've got 500 times 10. So 10 times my 500. And then in my final box, I've got 500 times 9. So 9 times 500. And those problems are what I'm going to solve. Remember, these problems can all be solved using mental math, right? So let's do 10 times 7. So we're going to look at our numbers that aren't 0, right? I've got 1 and 7. Well, 1 times 7 is 7, right? I've got this 0 that I did not use. So I'm going to add it on to the end. But then I've got one number to the right of my decimal place. So I scooted over 1, and I end up with 7.0 as our answer for 10 times 7/10. Now, same thing for 9 times 7/10. I've got 9 times 7 which is 63. But then I have one number to the right of my 0, so I scoot it over 1 and end up with 6.3. Same thing over here. I've got 1 times 5, which is 5. This 0 and 10 that I didn't use, so I added on to the end. But then I've got 2 numbers to the right of my decimal. So I scoot over 1, 2, and end up with 0.5 or 0.5 as my answer. And our last one, we've got 9 times 5, which is 45. But then I have 2 numbers to the right of my decimal, so I scoot it over 1, 2. End up with 0.45. So our next step is to add all of these numbers up. So I'm going to do 7.0. All these already have decimals, so we're good on that. Plus 6.3 plus 0.50 or 0.50 plus 0.45. Add placeholder zeros in my areas that don't have any. My decimals lined up, so I'm ready to add. So 0 plus 0 plus 0 plus 5 is 5. 0 plus 3 plus 5 is 8. Plus 4 is 12. Carry the 1. 1 plus 7 is 8. Plus 6 is 14. Plus zeros are still 14. My decimals were all in a line, so my answer decimal goes down here. So my answer ends up being 14 and 25 So 14 and 25 would be my answer. So remember, just like before, right? We're just breaking up our processes to be kind of individual, but we're still doing the exact same thing, right? Because if I was just doing 19 times 0.75, I would do my 9 times 5, which is here. I would do my 5 times 1, which is 5 times 10, right? Because that one's in the tens place, which is here. Then we would do the 7 times 9, which is here. And then the 7 times 1, which is 7 times 10, which would be here. So we did all these individually and then just added them up just like our final step in multiplication. Let's look at one with a little bit longer problem. So now I've got 23 times 56.1. So my boxes is a little bit longer because I've got more numbers in 56.1, right? 23 would be 20 plus 3. And then 56.1 would be 50 plus 6 plus 1/10, right? So 23 is going to go over here, 20, and then 3. And then I've got 50, 6, and then 1/10. Just like expanded notation, right? So now let's think about our multiplication problem. So remember, this box, whatever row and column it overlaps. So if this is 50 and then 20, that's going to be 50 times 20. Right? And so now my next one, I've got my 50s. I'm still in my 50s column, but now I'm in my 3 rows, so that's going to be 50 times 3. My next column is my 6s. So that's going to be 6 times, we're in the 20s row, so 6 times 20. And then I'm still in my 6 column, so it's going to be 6 times the row, which is 3. And then for my 1/10, I'm in my 10ths column, so it's going to be 0.1 times the row, which is 20. And then I'm still in my 1/10 column, so 1/10 times the row, which is 3. And so those are the problems that we're going to be solving. And just like before, we can do mental math to solve these. Look at my numbers that aren't 0. I've got 5 and 2. Well, 5 times 2 is 10. Plus the zeros I didn't use is 1,000. So that is 1,000. 50 times 3. 5 times 3 is 15. Plus the 0 we didn't use is 150. Six times 20. Look at 6 times 2. 6 times 2 is 12. Plus the 0 we didn't use is 120. 6 times 3. Well, 6 times 3, that's a math factor, right? That's 18. We didn't have any extra zeros that we had to bother with. So now all my decimal ones. So we're still doing the same thing. We're looking at our numbers that aren't zeros. So I've got 1 times 2, which is 2. We have this 0 in 20 that we didn't use, so it goes on to the end. But I had one number to the right of my decimal, so it scoots back 1. And I end up with 2.0. Same thing for 1 times 3. So I'll do 1 times 3, which is 3. But then I had one number to the right of my decimal, so it scoots over 1, and I end up with 0.3 or 0.3. So now I've got all my numbers done, and I am going to add them up to get my final answer. So I'm going to do 1,000 plus 150 plus 120 plus 18 plus 2.0. Remember, everything's got to have a decimal then. If something's got a decimal, everything's got to have a decimal. Plus 0.3. We are kind of tight on some room. And then add all your placeholder zeros. Now you're ready to add. So all those zeros plus 3 is 3. 0 plus 0 plus 0 plus 8 is 8. Plus 2 is 10. Plus 0 is still 10. Carry the 1. 1 plus 0 is 1. Plus 5 is 6. Plus 2 is 8. Plus 1 is 9. Well, 0 plus 1 plus 1 is 2. Plus our final one is 1. Make sure our decimals are in a line. Add my answer decimal, and I end up with 1,290.3. So we're out of room over here, so I'll just write over here. 1,290 and 3/10 is my final answer. So these problems break down our multiplication, like we said, just into the individual steps that we are already used to doing in our standard algorithm. But now we kind of use mental math in order to help us. So remember, this is not a different way of doing multiplication that you have to use, but this is just another way to show it. Let's look at one more problem. Let's look at this word problem. It says, Craig works at a restaurant for 21 hours in January. At this rate, how many hours will he work after 7.5 months? So, that sounds like a multiplying, right? They give us the amount of hours in 1 month, right? We're trying to find how many total hours after 7.5 months. So, we're going to do 21 times 7.5. So, 21 was 20 plus 1, right? 7.5 is 7 plus 0.5 based on their place values in expanded form, right? So that's what I'm going to use to fill in my area model. So I've got 20 plus 1 and then 7 and 5/10. And now I'm ready to multiply. So in my 7s column, right, I've got 7s as my column, 20 as my row. So it's going to be 20 times 7. Still in my 7s column, but now I'm in my 1 row. That's going to be 1 times 7. Now I'm in my 5/10 column, but my 20 row. So that's going to be 20 times 5/10. But now I'm still in my 5/10 column, but in my 1 row. So that's 1 times 5/10. And now I'm ready to solve. So just like before, remember, we're looking at numbers that aren't 0 in order to help us solve this using mental math. So I'm going to do 2 times 7, which is 14, plus the 0 we didn't use, so that's 140. Then I've got 1 times 7. Well, that's easy, right? That's just 7. So now 20 times 0.5, I'm going to do 2 times 5, which is 10, plus the 0 I didn't use, so that's 100. But then I had one number to the right of my decimal, so this goes over 1. So I end up with 10.0. And then 1 times 5/10, well, 1 times anything stays the same, so my answer is just 5/10. And now I'm ready to add up all of my numbers. So I'm going to do 140. But remember, everything has to have a decimal, right? Now some numbers have decimals, everything's got to have a decimal. So if it's out of sight, it's to the right. So 140, then my decimal goes afterwards. 7, decimal goes to the right. 10.0, so it's going to be 10.0. And then 5/10, that's 0.5. Add placeholder zeros. And I'm ready to add. So 0 plus 0 plus 0 plus 5 is 5. My decimal is in a row. 0 plus 7 plus 0 plus 0 is 7. 4 plus 1 is 5. And 1 by itself is 5. So my final answer ends up being 157.5 hours in 7 5/10 months. So that is using an area model to solve our multiplication problems. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 problems to do on your own. The final problems don't require you using area models. So you can just use normal multiplication, traditional multiplication to solve those. But on the other 6 questions, you will have to use your area model to solve. These boxes are text boxes, so you can type your answers in there. So on these boxes, like the area model boxes, so that would be this box, right? Those, you can type in the actual problem or just the answer, however you want to fill that out. So we will go over whatever questions y'all want at our second meeting of the day. And have a great day, guys. I'll talk to y'all later. Bye.